want to thank NDE for taking the time to come explain this in detail to the school leaders. And so with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Amber and Megan. They can briefly introduce themselves and then they can explain what's happened and essentially what was wrong with the previous calculation and how the calculation works so we all understand that going forward. So Amber, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. Before I get started, Megan, did you want to say anything, or you're good for me to just get right into it?
No, I'll take a moment. I did also want to clarify that we should have Deputy Superintendent Christy McGill on the call as well. And just for clarity, obviously, we have two divisions represented in this work. Title IIA is administered within the Office of Educator Licensure and Educator Effectiveness and Family Engagement. Sorry, I kind of butchered that order of operations a little bit. And that is overseen by Christy McGill's group with the direction of Director Jeff Brisky. And then my division, Student Investment Division, I have Amber within the Office of District Support Services. And so we're supporting each other and working through definitions and business rules and all of those conversations that have led us to today. So, Christy, unless you had anything you wanted to add, I was going to turn it over to Amber.
Please do. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Christy. Most of you are used to seeing me, I think, at our Grants Management Unit office hours and quarterly subrecipient meetings. As Megan said, we're within the Student Investment Division, and we don't generally interact with this work, but we have been supporting and leaning in to support our programmatic offices with a number of the changes that have happened in fiscal year 25 with reductions in funding across the board as a result of the state's portion, our share of formula children reducing compared to the rest of the country's portion of formula children. And so there was an overall general reduction of 7% in funding in all of our entitlement grants. And so we did have a similar meeting to this with our Title I allocations earlier in July to kind of explain those reductions and what that meant across the board and how those amounts are determined fundamentally first by the U.S. Department of Education, and then how those allocations feed into the determinations, the calculations for our local education agencies once those dollars have been assigned to the Department of Education here in Nevada. And so we're going to take a very similar approach that we did for the Title I meeting here with the Title II meeting. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for I can see Melissa, Megan, and Christy. Can one of you give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So this first tab of this Excel file just reiterates what's stated in the law. So the Elementary Secondary Education Act of 1965 as reauthorized and amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act requires state education agencies to subaward funding from our Title IIA funds to local education agencies, and there are parameters on how we do that. And so we have to award at least 95% of the funding that we get at the state level via sub-grants. And we can reserve, we have the ability to reserve up to 3% of those funds for state special projects. And if we do so, then we have to, the minimum amount that we give to our local education agencies ends up being 92.15%. And when we, either we do the 95% or the 92.15%, what's left is divvied up in two very clear and distinct ways. 20% of the funding is divvied up based on the local education agency's share of children ages 5 to 17. That's called the population, all children ages 5 to 17. These are always going to use the census count, the count of children ages 5 to 17 based on the count of students estimated by the U.S. Census Bureau. And then the 80% of funding, the remaining, is based on each LEA's portion of children ages 5 to 17, again, generated by the U.S. Census Bureau, who live below the poverty line. So we're going to look at what that looks like in application and in those in those formulas and those using those counts directly. But those come to us not in enrollment, not in attendance, but from the U.S. Census Bureau. And we're using the counts that the U.S. Census Bureau provides to us through the U.S. Department of Education. And these are the same counts that are used in the Title I allocations. Now, one thing you all know, I don't have to tell you this, but there are no geographic lines for our SPCSA sponsored charter schools. And so there are no census tracts that we can apply counts of children as determined by the U.S. Census Bureau for purposes of Title I or Title IIA allocations. And so we have to use some approach to generating those counts or estimating those counts. It's a best estimate. And that responsibility is given to state education agencies by the U.S. Department of Education. And that is because every state approaches their work with charter schools in a slightly different way. So it would not be possible for USED to tell states, this is how you do it for your charter schools, because every state manages and administers their partnerships with their charter schools in different ways. And so once we've made those best estimates, using the methodology that we use in Title I, we're going to apply the same methodology to Title II, then we still determine the funding based on every LEA. So where there are 17 school districts and then the SPCSA as an LEA, their portion, their share of children ages 5 to 17 in total as a population, and then their portion of children ages 5 to 17 who live below the poverty line, their portion of that. And so that is the basic way. It's very easy for Title IIA when compared to Title IA. So here's a snip directly from the law, from the Elementary Secondary Education Act of 1965, Section 2102, found on page 167. It says exactly that, and I'll just highlight for you here. It has to be children that are bound by that 5 to 17 age range, and it's your share of that total population or your share of that population of children who live below the poverty line. Okay, so it has to be bound by that, by law. And when we looked at this for Title I, and in fact, I brought it over here for you as well, this is what we did. We looked at how this formula factors in. This is the count of students that we get from the U.S. Census Bureau that says these are the count of kids ages 5 to 17 in each county within their county lines that live below the poverty line. Now in Title I, there are additional children that have to be factored in that qualify for Title I for our highest poverty schools. So those students that are neglected, delinquent, foster involved, or their family qualifies for TANF. We don't have to do that for Title IIA, but fundamentally, these are the number of kids that live below the poverty line, and this is the data we receive from U.S. Census Bureau, the SAPI data. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as that. But you'll notice that we don't have counts of students. These are only going to be within the county lines. We don't get those for the SPCSA because there are no geographic lines. And so we have to use a different measure of poverty to derive a best estimate for SPCSA charter schools. And so what's done with Title I, and I'll show you then the same approach for Title IIA. What's done for Title I is we do a different measure of poverty. And what we do have access to is our free and reduced price lunch. So we look at each county and we say the total number of kids in that county that qualify for free and reduced price lunch is this amount. And the total number of children that attend an SPCSA sponsored charter school in that county that qualify for free and reduced price lunch. And then we do a simple division and we determine the percentage. So let's do some real numbers. I think this one might be the easiest one because it's 10%. So let's look at these numbers. I say in Clark County School District, in the Clark County lines, there are 296,000 children, 296,267 that qualify for free and reduced price lunch. Of those children, 29,850 of them attend an SPCSA sponsored charter school. So if I click into this box right here, you can see I'm simply dividing the total number of kids who qualify for free and reduced price lunch within Clark County as a whole. How many of them attend an SPCSA sponsored charter school? Super easy math, it's 10%. Got a bunch of digits after that decimal point, but it's roughly 10%, right? So I do that 17 times for 17 counties, and I derive the percentage, the proportionality of children who attend an SPCSA sponsored charter school within each county's geographic boundaries. And then we apply that percentage to the number of children that the U.S. Census Bureau says live below the poverty line within those same county lines. So when I take in Clark County and I say there are roughly 10% of the population that qualifies for free and reduced price lunch, which is a different measure of poverty, I'm going to give 10% of the census kids that live below the poverty line, and I'm going to attribute those to the SPCSA. And I'm going to subtract those from the Clark County School District. So I'm saying in Clark County, Census Bureau said there were 63,932 children who lived in the ages of 5 to 17 who live below the poverty line. I'm attributing 6,444 of them to the SPCSA. The rest of them are going to be attributed to Clark County. And then for Title I, we have to add these additional children that qualify for Title I, right? Any questions on that so far? All right, so let's look how it works in Title II. These are the exact same numbers. Here's Clark County. Here's the count of students. Oops. So if I grab the wrong button. So in Clark County, census said that there are 63,932 children ages 5 to 17 who live below the poverty line. Our team from Adam tells us there are 296,267 kids within the county lines that qualify for free and reduced price lunch. Of those, 29,850 attend SPCSA sponsored charter schools. That's roughly 10% of the population. So using a different measure of poverty, I've derived the proportion in that county lines that attend an SPCSA sponsored charter school. I'm going to apply that proportion to the count from U.S. Census Bureau of children ages 5 to 17 who fall below the poverty line. I'm going to attribute that to the SPCSA and subtract it from what is applied to Clark County School District. I'm going to do that 17 times, right? So if I look at the formulas in every one of these, are going to do the exact same thing, where I've derived the percentage and applied that to the count from census to determine the amount that should be attributed to the SPCSA based on that derived proportion. I'm going to sum that all up and say that SPCSA's portion of children, our best estimate based on the best data we have access to right now, is that the SPCSA's portion of children who live below the poverty line from the census count is 6,793. The rest of them will be attributed to their county lines based on the census counts. When I check these, there's a little bit of a rounding, but I'm checking because I have to factor out Eureka. Eureka tends to decline these funds. So while they're factored in on the calculations, they get zeroed out here because they don't accept the funding. So that's how the proportionality is derived, so that we can say we have to figure out our best estimate of children below the poverty line, ages 5 to 17, that should be attributed to the SPCSA when they don't have geographic lines that support census tract counts. And this is the way that it's done in Title I and has been done in Title I by us for us by USAID. And this is the way that we have been advised by USAID to do it for Title II-A as well, based on the methodology that's been applied for Title I forever. What has been done in the past for poverty counts alone is that rather than making this proportional adjustment, this was a straight subtraction where we were taking the total number of census kids and subtracting the free and reduced price lunch kids 1-to-1. Their problem with that is that they are different variables with different denominators entirely. And so in Clark County, when we say there are 63,932 kids that live below the poverty line, that's the universe. That's the highest it can go. When we say that there are 29,850 kids that attend an SPCSA sponsored charter school in Clark County and that qualify for free and reduced price lunch, that is not the denominator. That's out of a total of almost 300,000 children. It also does not exclude children who are younger than 5 or older than 17, right? So we've now gone beyond the constraints of what the law allows us to do in terms of that bracketing with 5 to 17-year-olds. And we've gone beyond our charge from the feds to say you have to derive your best estimate that can be applied to the census counts, right? Using a different measure of poverty. Any questions on the poverty adjustments so far?
I have a quick question, Amber. I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So all of the charters that are authorized by SPCSA in Clark County are going to get that 10.08%?
So this is, yeah, so you're getting to the next level. There are
Right.
weeds and then there are other weeds. So we're the first level of the weeds, Dr. Feinstein. Can we get through the first level of weeds and then we'll get to the next level of weeds?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Trevor, did you have a question as well? I saw your hand go up and down, but I don't know if you were high-fiving
My
me.
question was similar to his.
Okay.
With the
I
10%.
thought it was a high five. Tam?
I was just going to ask, since
sure.
I'm on,
Yeah, go
so we
ahead.
know that with the adjustment in kindergarten that kids younger than 5 aren't there anyway. So it's really just the 18-year-old side on that. Is that correct?
For here on the free and reduced price lunch?
Well, we was talking about adjusting for kids who are younger than 5. I don't think those kids really exist anymore with the new adjustment when kids can enter kindergarten.
So yeah, so
So,
the age bracket, yeah. So all we're using free and reduced price lunch for is to derive a proportion. We're just using that to derive a percentage from a different measure of poverty that we can then use to apply to the census count kids. Right?
What was the calculation before this year?
So what I was saying is before this year, just using Clark as an example, is that we were taking the total count of census kids and directly subtracting the total count of free and reduced price lunch kids, rather than deriving a proportion. So you can see that that would be roughly half rather than, and that would attribute for Clark County alone, that would have attributed almost 30,000 kids to the SPCSA's portion, rather than the 6,441 that should have been attributed.
Don't we have direct certified reports that give us these numbers for the most part?
No, not directly. So this all has to be based on the census count from USAID. So I can't make the allocations based on these numbers at all. I have to use these numbers or any other number that I have that's better data. These are the best data points we have right now. We use these numbers to derive a proportion to determine our best estimate of kids from SPCSA sponsored charter schools who would fall within those census count kids. This is the top number of what I have to base my allocations off of, the 78,589. That's the top number. That's my ceiling.
I get that, but I'm just saying we get a report for direct certify for kids who qualify for FRL.
That's not the
Wouldn't
count
that
I
be
can
more
use though, Trevor.
proportional?
I can't use FRL. Yeah.
I'm not talking about FR, I'm talking about kids on Medicaid. I'm saying that's what we use for FRLs. Do kids automatically qualify without applications?
I think that you're getting into different, I think, conversation than what we're having for today. And I think it's an important conversation that Melissa and I've talked about and Jen potentially for the future. But this is the approach that's been used for Title I for a very long time, and which we were instructed to use for Title IIA. But so what we have done and what we have done for 25 is what we've used the FRL counts to derive a proportion. That proportion is then applied to the census counts so that we can attribute some of the census counts to our SPCSA schools, remove those census counts from our district counts, and still end up at the ceiling of 78,589 kids.
I just think we're getting a lower percentage based upon doing it this way than when we have some more information. So.
Right. And I think that's, it's something that I think we'll be talking about over the coming year. But this is what we've been told to do by USAID for this year. Tam?
Yeah, I think it's a similar question in that why would we not take the state as a whole poverty numbers and take SPCSA compared to the state as a whole? And like the proportion SPCSA, right? So we know SPCSA is about, X percent of the state as a whole. And so we could run those numbers that way to see where we're not comparing it county by county and we're comparing it state and state, not county by county, because the state is the whole state, not just the county. And then how are we comparing that and using those numbers so that we don't have such a high denominator for such a low, right? Because you're comparing out of SPCSA, which is nowhere close to the number of students that Clark County serves, right? And you're making that the denominator as opposed to a different denominator if you look at the state as a whole.
Sure. And what I want to really focus on is these numbers only factor in to determine a proportionality that's applied to the census count. But the federal law requires me to use only the census counts to determine the allocations at both the poverty and the population levels. And those census counts are bound by county lines because our school districts in Nevada are geographically bound by county lines. And so this is I have to back into that.
Just real quick. So then Amber, so then is SPC in this 63,932, is that Clark County kids and SPCSA kids?
It is all children that live within Clark County, not Clark County School District. Yep. All children that live within Clark County lines who the U.S. Census Bureau has estimated live below the poverty line. That includes both, like any child, whether they attend Clark County School District, the SPCSA.
Okay.
Amber, you unfortunately froze. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I feel like my question was answered. It's all good.
Okay. I just messaged her, hopefully.
Yeah, let's give her a minute she might have to log off and log back on, but let's give her a minute to do that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I apologize. Our statewide systems have been having internet outages over the last few days, stemming into last week as well. So I think we might be having a problem there. Let me poke my head in the corner. And
yes, we are well aware of that. It's been fun.
Yeah. Okay. Give me just a moment. Okay, unfortunately, she's continuing to have difficulty, so I'm going to have her come in here and continue from my computer. So just a moment.
All right, I get to learn how to drive someone else's laptop temporarily. Or computer. Oops. There we go. We put it on a different screen. Sorry, you guys. It's helpful to have internet. Thank you. Okay, let me share. Thank you. She's going to share for me. There we go. Thank you so much. Sorry, Tam. Okay, so let's try again. All right. So what I have to do is I am required to use, we are required. No, down here. Okay, I just can't get my mouse to that screen. Okay. Oh, hold on, hold on. Now we should be good. All right. Can you see the spreadsheet that I'm fighting with? Can you hear us? Christy can see it. Okay, and you can hear us. Okay. So we are required by USAID, we have to use the census count, children ages 5 to 17. Those come to us bound from USAID, from the Census Bureau through USAID. They send us a what's called SAPI data from the Census Bureau, and it comes to us already, Tam, in county lines, already divided up for us by county lines. And then we have to take that information and provide our best estimate on how to allocate that to our charter LEAs. And the way that we've done it, that in fact USAID has done it for us the past several years, is using free and reduced price lunch as a different but similar metric of poverty. We have to use a measure of poverty because we're deriving a proportion of poverty from the count of children ages 17 who fall below the poverty line. I can't use your share of population. I have to use some measure of poverty to say, this is your proportion of poverty using this other metric of poverty. And then I apply that proportion to the count of kids ages 5 to 17 that the Census Bureau says fall below the poverty line. That's our best estimate. And so that's what we do for, that's how we get to this percentage. We do that across all 17 counties, those geographic fences that the Census Bureau sets, and apply that to figure out how many kids in each county line should be attributed to the SPCSA in total that would live below the poverty line from those census count kids, and the rest are applied to the district within those county lines for poverty. Does that get a little closer to clarifying for you?
What are you using for the poverty measure?
Free and reduced price lunch is the other poverty measure that we have access to. This count is the count we received from USAID. It is the estimate of children ages 5 to 17 from the census count below the poverty line. Hey, Jenny.
Bye.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jenny. I'm from Matter Academy. I'm just the free and redundant free FRL number that your guys are pulling. Is that what you're pulling that from Bighorn? Where are you getting that?
We get these numbers from our Adam team.
Okay, thank you.
These come from, yeah, and you can see it comes from the count day. So it's provided to us from the October 1st count day on both of these. there any other questions so far? Is that good to go, Jenny? Your hand's still just up?
How do you, curious, out of curiosity, how do you determine Clark counties?
I'm sorry, their free and reduced price lunch?
Their census, like how do you determine their Title II based on the census?
So we
Because
just
you
went
don't
through
have
that,
to
but I can do it again here. So these
Like
counts.
Clark County School District, sorry, Clark County School District. How do you determine Clark County School District's
We'll
percentage?
do it all over again. Here we go. So I get this count from the U.S. Census Bureau, gives it to USAID. They send it to us in a file that's the SAPI file. Okay,
Yes.
so this comes for each county like this.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes, I get that part.
all right. So then I go through a process for each county where I take your free and
That's
reduced
not my-
price.
That's
Yeah.
not my question. That's not my question. So like, then how, like, so what is
I
the
take
percentage
out-
Clark County School District gets of Title II funds?
It's the same percentage everybody else does, which is your share of kids who live below the poverty line. And I haven't quite gotten to that explanation yet because we're still talking about how we determine the proportion for the SPCSA.
Okay, great,
All right.
thanks.
Any other questions on that? Because otherwise we can jump to that if we're ready.
Great, perfect, thanks.
Okay. Oops.
Amber, I was wondering, does the CEP affect this at all? The
No.
accounts? Okay, thanks.
All right. All right. So once I've done, did you have another question, Jenny? Oh, okay. So once I've done this for all 17 counties and I've figured out how much should be attributed to the SPCSA and reduce that from each county's count for each school district, right? Now my job is to divvy up 80% of the amount of funding that we're going to award and subawards to each LEA based on their share of this, right? We can do that in a couple ways. The easiest way is to say, so here's the total amount of funding that we got as a state for this is CAN 24, the federal fiscal year 24, we would say state fiscal year 25, right? So for this fiscal year that just started, this is the amount of money that we are issuing in subgrants at 92.15% that we talked about here on the front page, right? So this is the amount that I have that we're going to issue in subgrants. This is 80% of that funding. It's going to go based on your share of the poverty count. If I say these are the total number of kids, remember that's the ceiling of number of kids that I have to issue it. And I say this is the amount of money I have divided by the total number of kids. This is the price, this is the funding per kid that we distributed on, right? And I do that to say, I'll just hide these for a second so they're not distracting. And I say, this is your count for each school district or for the SPCSA. And I multiply that count times the funding per kid. And that's done 18 times. Everybody's count of kids times the price per the per pupil amount. So here's Clark County, that's their number of kids times the 183.59 per kid. Same thing goes for the SPCSA. There's your 183.59. This is your number of kids who fall below the poverty line. We do that 18 times, 17 times because Eureka declines their funding. Okay, does that get you where you needed to be, Tam?
Yeah, but raises another concern that SPCSA kids are going to the county first and then the SPCSA. Because the Clark still gets the 63,932. They don't get minus any SPCSA kids.
Yeah, they do right here.
So if you were to sum the total kids of 78,589, there's nothing for SPCSA right there. And thus SPCSA kids go to the county first and then again to SPCSA?
No. So look right here in this for Clark County. This is the district kids. I took the total number from census and I subtracted what was attributed to the SPCSA from Clark County. They only get 57,000 kids. And when I do their per pupil amount, they're only getting 57,000 kids.
Okay,
When I
and you
do
do that for every county?
SPCSA, Yep, when I do that for the SPCSAs, they're getting it based on their total, which is right here. And the total is every county. And we did it, yeah. The formula here is for every county. We're taking it out. Because I cannot attribute, like if I look at his here all together, it's 78,548. Because I'm losing these 42 kids that Eureka declines for. Yeah, so I derive the proportion, I attribute all of these to the SPCSA, and I subtract all of these to give the district counts.
And before it wasn't a proportion, and that's why it decreased so much. Is that accurate? Okay.
Yeah, before it was just a straight subtraction, which went beyond the bounds and also violated the requirement that it had to be the census counts. Lee.
That might answer my question. I got on a little late because we still had traffic, but I was just wondering if funding drastically went down, because I know that our free and reduced lunch population of kids has done nothing but increase. So if you're using those numbers, I was just a little confused as to why the funding decreased so significantly this year.
I think if you were to think about, if we're taking 63,000 and rather than subtracting 6,441, and we're doing this 17 times, right, across 17 county lines, I'm subtracting a full 29,000, and I'm attributing, fundamentally, if I was attributing 31,000 kids to the SPCSA, and that leaves me, fundamentally 50,000 kids for the rest of the state, then that's going to give a share to the SPCSA that's much larger than 6,793 kids, right? So that's a big drop in funding because the proportionality was not derived. It was a straight subtraction rather than a proportional reduction.
So if they're doing this to every county and that across the state, where's all the excess funding going? Because if everybody's funding's dropping because of the proportionality.
So the overweighting on the proportionality would have only been here for the SPCSA, right? What it meant is that the SPCSA was getting a much higher proportion, and the districts were getting a much lower proportion. If this is the top, if the ceiling is 78,589 kids, and rather than 6,793 of them going to the SPCSA, 31,525 of them are going to SPCSA. That means that instead of 71,755 going to the districts, there's only 50,000 or so going to the sub 50,000 going to the districts. So there's a drop for the SPCSA, but a proportional increase for the districts.
So the money was taken away from charter and given to the districts, pretty much.
It was rebalanced appropriately based on the proportions.
Yeah, it had to be rebalanced because of this was not being proportionally reduced the way the law, federal law, requires us to as a state. And the law also requires us, as we talked about earlier, probably before you were able to jump on, I have to use census counts. I have to use counts of kids between 5 and 17 that fall below the poverty line. I cannot use straight free and reduced price lunch kids because it's beyond those parameters.
So did the law just change when you went over the law? Because I wasn't in here for that. Did the law just change this past year, or was the state not following the law all along?
We had an opportunity to realign with our Title II allocations with what's been done with Title I. And that came as a result when we had a chance to really dig into the calculations with the 7% overall reduction to the state's entitlement funds across the board. And we did talk about that briefly at the beginning. That was a result of our share of eligible children reducing compared to the share of eligible children across the country. Dusty? If you're talking, Dusty, we can't hear you. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, real quick, I put a question in the chat. I don't know if you saw it, but I'm looking at, for example, Churchill County's FRL numbers. Does that include, if they've qualified all their schools under the CEP provision, is that the number that's in there? Because that appears to be the number.
We'd have to verify. These come from the Adam team, from the October 1st count day. And these are the same counts that are used in the Title I allocations. So you can see them here. Again, this comes from the Title I allocation workbook. So those are the ones that we were directed to use by US Ed.
Okay, just looking at that one number and the overall numbers of FRL, those appear to me, because I've seen other numbers similar to that, to include that. If that's the case, the only point I'd like to make is it would inflate the district's proportion of dollars by qualifying under the CEP provision, whereas the charter schools are spread out all across the state and can't really qualify under that provision, to my understanding.
We'll get that information for you, Dusty. We'll look into that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we did talk, I think, earlier before you jumped in, that one of the things we do want to talk about just with the, and these are, so keep in mind that the census counts are always 2 or 3 years delayed. The free and reduced price lunch counts are also a little delayed. And so there's an opportunity. Again, the feds don't tell us what to do. They tell us to use our best data available to come up with our best estimate. And so, you know, we want to make sure that we're having good conversations about, at some point, is there better data? We've kind of noodled on it here, and we're not sure that there is, but we're, you know, obviously open to having those conversations. We want to make sure that it's good, that it's right. Or keep looking at it, right? If there's going to be innovations and things as they come along. All right. Tam had another question. Did districts get the same proportion? Yeah, it's all applied to everybody the same way, exactly the same way. And that's part of the problem is that, you know, in the law, this is what we're required to do. When we were doing it the old way with a straight reduction, a straight subtraction that did not use the way the law requires it to, it overinflated the proportion for SPCSA schools, and it also under-calculated the proportion that our school districts have a legal right to those funds, right? So we had to make that correction as soon as we identified the issue, because the districts were impacted negatively, and it was outside the bounds of the law, and so we have to apply the same rules to all LEAs equally. What was done prior was advantaging the SPCSA schools at the cost of the school districts, and so this actually levels the playing field. Are we good with the poverty process? Population is really easy, comparatively. All right, so I'm going to scroll down for population. Population, we get a total number of children from US Census. This is not just children who live below the poverty line, but all children ages 5 to 17 within those same geographic county lines, right, that we talked about. So these are that's the camera up there as I keep adjusting and it's not moving. I'm shorter than Megan is, so I have to sit up taller. These counts here in column B, these are the total number of children that come to us from SAPI data from 2022 census count. This is census data says that within the county lines, White Pine County, Washoe County, Lincoln County, these are the number of children ages 5 to 17 who live within those county lines. It's quite handy because our Adam team can tell us the number of children ages 5 to 17 on October 1st count day who are enrolled in each county in an SPCSA sponsored charter school by county lines. In that case, it's lovely. We do a simple subtraction. where you take the total number of children ages 5 to 17 who are enrolled in an SPCSA sponsored charter school, and we subtract it from the total population from census. And we do that 17 times. Oops. But all the way down, I take the total number from the SPCSA of your enrollment in every county, ages 5 to 17. That's what's attributed to the SPCSA. I subtract all of those from each of the school districts. That's what's attributed to each of them. I take the same approach where I took, I'm just going to hide these really quickly so you can see it. The total amount of funding that was available for grants, 20% of that has to be distributed on your share of population children ages 5 to 17 from the census count. That gives us a $7.01 per pupil amount. I then do the same thing that I did before, where I say, here's your population of kids that you, sorry, up here. Carson has 8,566 kids. Once I've subtracted the 48 that attend a SPCSA sponsored charter school in Carson City, I multiply that times the $7.01 per pupil amount for the 20% population. And that's what Carson gets for their population percentage. I do that times everybody, including the SPCSA, where the SPCSA's amount is that 61,637 children ages 5 to 17 that attend an SPCSA sponsored charter school. And then we combine the 80% plus the 20% to get your total FY25 allocations on the year. There's a little bit of unobligated funding because of rounding, and that's okay. And that's how the total amounts for your FY25 allocations have been derived for FY25. They really are very simple compared to Title I. Title I has a lot of sheets on their allocation calculations spreadsheet because there's all the rules about concentrated and targeted and different thresholds for qualifying for those. Title II is really simple once you've made those adjustments specific to the poverty portions. Trevor.
Just curious why we're using a number of 384 or down to 327 when enrollment at Clark County is more like 300, 290 something last year.
So again, Trevor,
shouldn't we be using enrollment
counts? These are not enrollment. This is census.
But we are using our enrollment because SPCSA enrolled kids, but there's more, I'm saying there's more kids in the county than there are enrolled in the district.
So this is just the enrolled that are ages 5 to 17.
Yeah, so but I'm saying the Clark County School District doesn't have 327,000 kids enrolled in it.
That is a good question. This is what we have been told to do from USAID, but I don't mind going back and asking them for that. And it's still going to derive a proportion, right? It's still proportionality.
Oh, and sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The 327,000, that isn't just the enrolled number in the school district. That's the total number of kids.
Yeah, it's still based on census population. So the rules are still on. And the other thing to keep in mind too, Trevor, is that the districts are still required to provide equitable services and those kinds of things too, right? So it's
I get that. I'm just saying there's homeschooled kids, there's private school kids, and it seems like that they're getting a proportion that services they're not providing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's still ages 5 to 17 in the geographic area. So that is a good question. I've looked at everything that USAID has published, and I haven't seen anything that said anything different. than that. And this is what the law tells us to do. Like if they've never told us to make any adjustment for the population piece of it. It's still a proportionality though. Still your share. Does that make sense? Because we're taking that total and we're dividing it by the number of kids total. Jamie.
Yeah, could you just explain one more time the reason for this proportionality versus just a direct calculation per student? And the reason specifically I'm asking is because in my particular school, we cross counties, so we pull students from different counties. So I just am curious why not just a.
And I think that actually might get into the second layer of weeds that Dr. Feinstein identified earlier. So when this is all said and done, what you're going to notice is these are made on what we would say is an LEA basis, right? So this is Carson City School District through White Pine County School Districts here. This is the SPCSA on mass, right? On everybody. Then what the SPCSA does is they determine the proportionality among their sponsored charter schools from there. And that is a question that I have no subject matter expertise or knowledge to speak to. And so what this does is and what we have to do as a state education agency, because the SPCSA, so we are required to use in the column B, the federal law requires us to use the census counts of students. And we have to we split the money up based on each LEA, so the school district and the SPCSA as the authority, as the local education agency authority for the charter schools, your portion of students, children, ages 5 to 17 of the population at whole, going to Trevor's question a second ago, or the portion of children ages 5 to 17 who are from families with incomes below the poverty line. So we call that population or poverty. 20% of the money is issued on your portion based on the population, and 80% of the money is issued based on your portion based on poverty, so below the poverty line. We have to use the census counts, and because the SPCSA does not have geographic lines like a school district does in Nevada, we have to find a way to best estimate the number of kids in each of these county lines that we should attribute to the SPCSA. And so we have to find a different measure of poverty for poverty's sake. So in this one, I'm saying your portion of kids in poverty. I can't use a different metric like population or number of kids who live in the state or brown hair versus blonde hair or anything else in some other arbitrary metric or demographic. I have to use a similar type measure, which is poverty. That I can say, using this other measure of poverty, I can say proportional representation in this other measure of poverty is roughly this percent. So I'm going to take that percent and apply it to the counts from census. That's my best estimate to derive a share of children who might live below the poverty line. And I'm going to attribute that then, that percent from the census count to the SPCSA. I'm going to take the total across all counties, and that's how I determine that LEA, the SPCSA as an LEA as a whole, to give them their portion of that money for poverty. And I subtract that from each school district at the county level. So 5 comes out of Carson, 40 comes out of Churchill, and so on and so forth. I can't do a straight subtraction because they are different metrics. They are different variables entirely with different boundings and definitions. And so this is what we are required to do by law, is to do a best estimate to determine share of the census kids. That's the count I have to use to make the allocations. I have to determine a share of census kids to attribute to the SPCSA. Oops, that's the wrong button. That's why it's not working. To subtract those from the districts in order to make the allocations to the SPCSA. Does that help, Jamie?
Yeah, it does. I'm wondering, is it possible at the conclusion of this call to just send us a copy of the, like that most recent Title II law that you're using so we can reference that?
Yeah, there's a snip here for you, but yeah, we can get you the link to that.
Thank
You can
you.
just, yeah, you can just, we can get it for you for sure though. Yeah. Trevor.
So, yeah, and I'm not arguing anything of but if Clark County's got a registration of 300,000, let's just use round numbers for this, and there's still 330,000, but we're being subtracted on an exact number, shouldn't the remaining overage of 30,000 be shared proportionately as well for the homeschool and private school kids and all that type of stuff?
Yeah, and that's what I said. We can go back and consult with USED on that. This is an interesting question because we haven't come across that with Title I either. It does exceed my expertise in this area, but I don't mind asking for sure, just to verify.
Yeah, and Amber, I'll just jump in really quick and just say that a lot of these things that you're talking about, we've kind of identified, and NDE is open to having some conversations about some of these things. So you have my word that I will do.
Yeah, and we've had a lot. Yeah, thanks, Melissa. We've had a lot of conversations about these to say, like, you know, we're going to keep having these conversations. Right now, we're following instructions. If that helps. Jamie, did you have another question? Is the hand still up?
No, I just got to figure out how to put that down. Sorry.
I'll take it as another hand, high five. Stacy and then Dusty. Oh, not Stacy.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, Stacy. Okay.
I just put it down faster than I could.
Fine. Okay.
It's not really a question, just a point to Trevor's question is that the district schools are required to provide proportionate equitable services to private schools and others in their areas too. So that does make up a little bit of the difference for the other.
Yeah, we did talk about that briefly, but yeah, they do have to provide some equitable services, and there's some other requirements and some constraints in there, but like I said, the population is entirely driven off the census count. And so it's an interesting question. Dusty.
Thank you. So real quick, if you guys identify corrections to be made throughout the year, whether it's due for some of these points made, like the CEP provision or what Trevor's point was for the other 20%, are you going to correct the funding allocations this year, or is this set for this year and you only make corrections going out to next year?
Based on the guidance instructions we've received from USED, we're fairly confident these are final for FY25. We're obviously in ongoing communications with them, and like Melissa said, between our two agencies, our sister agencies, and so we don't anticipate that. That being said, our practice, Dusty, is to correct. Like if there's a mistake, we're going to correct a mistake, and that's what we did this time. As soon as we identified that there was something that needed to be realigned, we did that as fast as we could. If something were to be identified where we would run it past USED and they, I don't anticipate that in this situation, but that's our standard operating procedure.
Well, and I appreciate that. I know you guys always look at that. When you pulled up that law and that second portion of that law says that it needs to be distributed based on children below the poverty line, when you guys have to derive your calculation, I understand that you have to derive the calculation because you can't use that number. So you're deriving off of FRL, but there's tens of thousands of kids in those numbers that you're using in the FRL numbers that don't fall into that provision of the law. They're simply qualified because of the CEP. And so to me, that is potentially an error that would need to be corrected. So if that's something that, if you guys find out that needs to be corrected and the funding can be corrected, I think that's great, but I would hate to see it fixed and then, it's not corrected till next year and charters lose out on all that money.
Yeah. And I think you're signed on just a little bit late, Dusty. I'll clarify. When we did review the Title I processes, I did clarify that that our Title I calculations have been done for us by USAID for a number of years, and so these are the numbers they've been using as well for us. And so, but like I said, I don't mind going and asking the questions. We'll take those back. Absolutely, we will. It may be also an opportunity for us to look at business rules within our own, teams here. But we'll keep asking those questions. I don't anticipate that we'll be making any changes to these processes for Title I or Title II, because both of them have been supervised by USAID and reviewed by USAID for FY25. John.
I'm sorry.
Oh, if you came off mute for a second, John, and now we can't hear you again. I don't know if you were.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, sure can.
So I understand everything's pretty static, but from the charter school authority, is there any indication that some of the money can adjust during the year with all the transiency we have?
No, it won't adjust during the year based on that, John. What I think the best we can hope for at this point is, one, we will continue to have conversations about column D and column C there, because I do think there's some other methodologies that USAID would sign off on. And, but NDE's right. They need to follow the same procedure for all grants. And this is what USAID has signed off on for this year. What I think we are trying to do at both the SPCSA and NDE is we are trying to figure out how we can make up some of these funds, since these awards were, I forget what it's called, but kind of approved, and there's a name for it, substantially approved or something. Thank you. Thank you. Substantially approved. And we know that you have allocated, like you've hired learning coaches and contracted with companies. So we're trying to find a way to kind of make it right, if you will, for this year. That said, even if they change the business rules and they say, yeah, column C and column D there's a more equitable way to do that, we're never going to go back to getting 50% of the Title II money. Like, that doesn't even, like, logically, if you look at that, it doesn't even make sense that charter schools should be getting 50% of that money, right? So I think it's important that you start realizing that even if adjustments are made, it's never going back to the way it was. That was not right. And you got to start preparing for that you're never going to see that level of funding again until we're serving 50% of the kids in Clark County. I would also just say, because I think, Amber, you're done kind of going through your calcs, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I would also just say that I hate to say this to you, but frankly, if you had money allocated in Title II that involved conferences and travel, you need to not do that unless you have another funding source. We are going to be lucky to be able to find the funds to pay for salaries. And I know a lot of you contract with third-party vendors to come in and do PD, and you've already done that already and have those PDs. So we're going to be lucky to find the money to make up that difference. There's no way we're going to make up the whole, 4 point whatever million dollars it was. So I'm going to say that again. If you have money in your Title II that was going to go for conferences and travel, do not proceed with that unless you have another funding source. NDE and the SPCSA are committed to looking for ways and other resources that we could reallocate to deal with salaries and contracts for PD vendors that you've already signed and gone into contract with. If you haven't already signed a contract, please do not. We just don't know how much of this we're going to be able to make up. So I think those are the really key takeaways that you need to think about here in the next, couple months.
I appreciate the comment and your support, and thank you for the answer.
Melissa, this is Rodney. When will we get an idea of what our funding will look like moving forward so we can start trying to figure out what to do for year
so NDE is going to give us this spreadsheet today. After this meeting, we're going to send it out to you too, so you have it, right? It's not a secret. And then from there, our finance and operations team will redo the calcs and get those to you. We're hoping by the end of next week. We do have a board meeting next week, so it may even be the beginning of the following week. But we're trying to get those to you ASAP, so you can get into the grants management system though right now and see like, oh, we said we were going to go to, this Teach Like a Champion conference. No, you're not unless you have another funding source, right? So you could start to kind of whittle it down that way, but we will get those to you before month's end, what your new allocation will be from us.
Okay, and then you're saying if it's salaried positions, the goal is to try to save those for this year.
Yeah, the goal is that we're going to try to find some other funding that we can reallocate towards PD. It's just that we can't do that overnight. It's very complicated in the state system to reallocate money. We can't just be like, oh, here's some money, we'll just move it over here. It doesn't work that way. It is insanely cumbersome. So it will be months and months before we are able to have it completely worked out. But I am committed to, we're committed to getting there and working on it, and we're not going to take our eye off the ball on this.
All right, so I'll go ahead and stop sharing. As Melissa said, we're going to get this over to their team, and so you all can have a copy. The formulas are all in there, hard-coded, so you can track those. Again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we'll get you the link to the law. I think it was Jamie that had asked for that. And thanks for the time. Thanks, Melissa, for letting us hijack your
Thanks, Christy, Megan, and Amber for taking the time. We appreciate you, and I could not have explained that as well as you did, so I'm really glad you were here to do that. And I'm going to give one last chance for questions. If you think of questions later, please shoot me an email and I'll kind of compile them because we'll be talking on the regular. So
yeah.
Awesome. Okay, you guys have a good night.
Have a good one. Thanks so much.